I'm Christopher Schmidt. The median price of a three-bedroom rental in Cambridge, Massachusetts today is $3,700, and this is Renters Matter. So one interesting thing that I've noticed as I've continued to look at the rental prices is that although the median rental in Cambridge right now is $3,700, it's actually one of the better times to be looking to rent because while the median rental is $3,700, which is about what it stayed at between 3,600 and 3,800 for the past couple of months, there's actually a lot more places on the market right now. What's happened is that a bunch of the apartments that flip over after September, which is when everyone comes in and out, September 1st is a huge moving day because of the huge student population. A lot of those rental units that were previously filled with tenants, and some of which had not been updated or touched in years in some cases, if they had tenants in them for 4 to 5, 8 years in Cambridge, have now actually emptied out, and the owners have gone ahead and tidied them up, cleaned them up, done repairs, done everything else like that, because if you don't rent for September 1st, you actually have a really hard time renting in that time period. I think probably January 1st is another date that you'll see, and maybe even February 1st move-in dates as people come back for school or come here for the first time in the spring semester. But right now there's more than 350 apartments in Cambridgeport or in Cambridge that are three-bedroom apartments, which means that there's like 150 that are less than $3,700 a month. Some as little as $3,400, $3,200 a month. Some even below $3,000, which you were not seeing in the September and October timeframe when people thought that they could get all of these higher rents. So the number was about the same at the median, but there were just fewer rentals available on the market. Just interesting things that you see in this kind of strange market we have, where rentals all turn over in September because of the heavy student population in the entire Boston region, but especially in Cambridge, where something along the lines of 15 to 20% of our population is students at MIT, Harvard, Lesley, Tufts, and of course all of the Boston, Boston College, BU, etc. So a huge population of students who are renting here that drives that up. So just an interesting thing to note, if you can rent now instead of on the September 1st time cycle, then there's actually a lot more options that might open up for you, options available in more places that you didn't see so much in the August, July, September timeframe. The other aspect of that, which is interesting, is earlier today, now Vice Mayor Alana Mellon tweeted out about the access for same-day legal services for anyone facing eviction. So there's an organization in the Boston area, which for anyone who's facing eviction, they can go on the day that they're doing court for an eviction proceeding and get support from a lawyer to have them help them facing their eviction in court that day. And one of the things that I was talking about is actually that although that's super useful, it's very important to be represented. It's very valuable to be represented by an attorney when you're dealing with anything in court, dealing with it yourself. No matter how educated you are, there's a bunch of things that you're not going to know, and knowing more is going to be helpful to you. But I also said in response to that, like, this is great, but what you're missing is a lot of tenants don't realize like what happens going into potentially being evicted or seeing a lease renewal that they think is out of their price range. At times in the past, I have had landlords get new leases to me after my previous lease expired, or gotten it to me 24 hours before my lease expired and asked me to sign it and return it the same day. Like, these things are difficult, and more difficult when the rent goes up by a lot, by an unsustainable amount. And with 75% of Massachusetts' low-income households being severely rent burdened, paying more than 50% of their rent in more than 50% of their income in rent, there's like an active and important part of that, which is that they can't necessarily, handle these things, and there's a lot of stress. If you're handed a lease renewal with a number that's much more, there's a lot of stress that says, okay, well, what happens if I don't do this? And getting advice on that is actually really important, really valuable to someone who does not have a lot of experience in there. And so this is something that I feel the city should be investing in, is that with every lease renewal that a tenant is facing, that the landlord should be asked to give them, information about what happens in the case of non-renewal, going month to month, what eviction proceedings look like, how you can get support, and potentially providing legal support outside of the court date, 2 to 4 hours per lease renewal or something along that being available for tenants to get help and talk about, hey, what about this? Like, this has been broken. Can I get money back for this? Can I negotiate with this? How much can I push on this? Because realistically, most landlords don't want to go through an eviction proceeding, and knowing what, you know, happens in the case where your rent has gone up is actually a thing that more people need to know about. Massachusetts has decent laws around, you know, going month to month by default, that you don't automatically get evicted, that eviction proceedings, you know, with legal and counsel support, you can probably, you know, turn this into a conversation that doesn't happen over a matter of days, but over a matter of weeks and months, and really have a conversation about, do you really want to evict me, or can we come up with a compromise between what you're offering and what I'm looking at? You know, I've said before that if a property owner really does want you gone in Massachusetts, you will have to leave, but not necessarily on the schedule that they have in mind, which might play a role in how effective your conversation is going forward. So I don't know, just some thoughts on looking at the rental market repeatedly over the past several months I've been doing this show, coming into 2020, and saying that, you know, although prices have not gone down, they've kind of floated around the same amount. There are a lot more options available this time of year if you can find a way to kind of hold your lease out to this time of year. Of course, no landlord wants to let you do that, because they're also going to have to try and rent out the place you're in currently if they're going to continue renting it. But that's less problematic if someone wants to sell or flip or change something along those lines. There's more opportunities for them that, you know, maybe they're willing to hold out with you a couple more months and extend your lease for just 6 months, and then you can be looking in the you know, January, February timeframe, where there might be more options available for you. I mentioned just a bit ago that we have a new vice mayor, you know, with a new city council having been seated earlier this week. On Monday, they went through their inauguration, and the council elects among itself a mayor and a vice chair of the city council, or the vice mayor, as we colloquially call them. But yeah, so selected mayor from among the city councilors is our first Muslim mayor in Massachusetts. Sumbul Siddiqui was elected by her councilors to the position of mayor. She was also the top vote getter in this year's election. So, you know, I think that this was her vote to have, her position to have if she was looking for it, and did, you know, take that opportunity up and negotiated, presumably behind closed doors, with other folks about how that was going to work. A unanimous vote for Sumbul as mayor, who will also take a role on the school committee now, as well as Alana Mallon as vice mayor, and both of those positions being anonymous, which is it's great. I'm super excited. Alana and Sumbul have been two people who I have been connected to within the local Cambridge political scene for the past 2 years, thanks to their podcast, Women Are Here, which is recorded right here at CCTV. It is a great listen on that gives you a background of what's going on in Cambridge politics, beyond the housing or renter focused issues I care about, down to every committee meeting, you know, what they saw, what they've heard, you know, what's going on in that space. And they've done a really good job of sharing their perspective on that. And I'm really happy to have both of them continue on the council and continue as mayor and vice mayor on the council. I think that they'll do a great job. Of course, more interesting to me is who gets to be chair of the various committees, whether that's ordinance or housing, the two committees that I personally am most interested in. Ordinance, because they are the committee that has to take up zoning petitions. Chair of the ordinance committee, I think, would be the position that, if I was on the council, I would be most excited about, not because you can drive the conversation, but because you can drive the schedule. And one of the things that I really feel in the city is that so many things drag on for so long, and I'm like, just schedule this, just get it done, have the conversation, get it done, and let's move on. You know, let's not take 6 months, you know, 5 months and 25 days to hear a petition, so that we've got to, you know, be shoving it in the last week and a half and trying to get it in all of the various forms that we have to get done in a 6-month timeline for a zoning petition. I just think that behavior is consistent, repeated, and problematic. And over the past 2 years, the ordinance committee has not been, in my opinion, aggressive about scheduling meetings. We saw this with the affordable housing overlay, where, you know, I felt like those meetings were scheduled into the summer months, which made a lot of people upset. And in ways that were not really necessary. So I'm looking forward to that. I think many of those committee positions will be decided, announced, appointed, whatever, on Monday. So that'll be interesting to see how that works out. Beyond that, the big items for the council this year, I think we can expect that the affordable housing overlay comes back. I expect that we will see a significant push around tenant protections with the tenant protection and displacement report that just came out, looking at condo conversion rules and looking at potentially having other home rule petitions in that space. Beyond that, I expect that there will be other housing issues that are brought to the forefront. One of the things that came up in the campaign or the election was the idea of eliminating parking minimums for residential parking was brought up. The idea of doing something around single-family zoning or legalizing apartments everywhere in the city, I think would be great. But the more significant thing, outside of zoning, outside of changes in that space, is the city manager's contract. The city manager's contract right now goes through January of next year. By September, he and/or the council will have to announce to each other whether there is an intent to continue that contract or to do a search for a new city manager. And this is an area where I know that I am sometimes a little bit alone in left field. But I actually I wear two hats in the city manager conversation. One, of course, is my position as a member and supporter of A Better Cambridge, where focusing on housing and especially affordable housing over the past year has been really a focus for me in the affordable housing overlay. But more importantly on that front is funding for affordable housing, where we're in a position at the moment where we don't have enough housing for low-income households, and we need to both zone for more housing, period, to help stop rising rents. We need to zone specifically for more affordable, for housing that we can get more inclusionary housing. So the idea of having developers be able to construct housing and also include some portion of that housing that is available to lower income families to have a kind of an integration plan. That's not really an affordable housing plan, but an integration plan where you don't have just super wealthy people living in this, tall ivory tower of housing, but rather you have units that are available to families and so on in that space, and figuring out ways to make that happen, which it has not in the past several years. But also funding for housing that is, public housing, or that would never be financially sustainable for a profit-driven developer to come in and build more housing as well. As this is the affordable housing overlay from a zoning perspective, but you've also got to fund that development. And with federal funds drying up in a lot of cases and not being available, this is something that you're really going to have to, push more at the municipal, more at the state level. And find ways to do that. Now, there's lots of ways you can do that. You could imagine bonding out for construction of housing that includes an affordability component that is built by the city and have the city be a landlord. Cambridge has not really taken that approach of, publicly owned housing or Cambridge Housing Authority properties that are, mixed income of low income, middle income, moderate income, and market rate development. But you could imagine that. There's lots of ways you can imagine looking at that, but that's an area where I think the current city manager has been more reticent. He did add $5 million to the city's budget, increasing it by about 1% this year, and plans to continue to ramp that up to 2%, 3%, and 4%, I think, over the next few years. But I think that that's kind of a too little too late element of that a little bit. I look at that as, holding your feet to the fire for years on affordable housing and finally having you say, we'll fund about 10 extra units per year from city money is not great. Or if you look at it differently, because of, matching funds that will fund an extra, 40 to 50 units per year, that's just not super compelling to me. And I would love to see more. The other hat that I look at with the city manager role is Upgrade Cambridge. Upgrade Cambridge is an organization fighting for municipal broadband in Cambridge. The idea that we should have a competitor to Comcast that is publicly owned, at least at the infrastructure level, with the idea that then private or public organizations could come in and compete on these publicly owned wires. So run cable to everybody's house and then let companies, including perhaps the city, compete on offering service to you rather than having to build out an entire network themselves. This is an infrastructure project that the city would be well suited to perform. The city manager has been extremely reticent to move forward with the idea of that in any way, has absolutely pushed back constantly, and said that he simply will not even study whether this is something that would be good for the city. And I find that a very frustrating position for someone to take. In a city like Cambridge, where we have so much technology, have so much educational opportunity, have so many different partners who would be great at moving forward the city and providing better internet options for residents, providing a basic utility for many residents who don't have it, that the city manager would push back and say, I don't think that this is worth investing in even studying, is a pretty frustrating position for me to be in, and choosing to not even have a meeting about it or talk to us about it, despite the support of 9 city councilors consistently over the past 2 years, and a petition that's among the largest petitions ever submitted to the city on the scale of the bike safety petition, which has driven many more results, is frustrating to me in the extreme. So I will want to see a pretty strong commitment from Louis on more affordable housing, on a more equitable share of some of the elements of housing stability, and ideally on moving forward with municipal broadband. That would be what I would want to see in order to support him coming back and continuing in this role. And he's been pretty reticent on all of those fronts. He's had years to get on board with these things and not take an action. So that's my personal position, and we'll see how that shakes out over the course of this year. The city manager really has the ability and responsibility of running Cambridge. The city council acts as a board of directors for the city, acts as the board of directors for the $600 million a year corporation that is effectively the city of Cambridge, but the city manager is the CEO. He appoints the boards, he appoints the departments, he runs the entire executive branch of more than 3,000 people work for the city government in Cambridge. And all of that is really something that, having a more aggressive position, having a more aggressive stance on what the city should be committing to is really important. At the same time, I think that there's a lot of things that we, focus on, which have lower impact. We've talked about, or I've talked about, the idea that we should build more housing. One of the ways that we build more housing is not asking the city to fund it, is not asking nonprofits to fund it, but finding ways to actually cause more housing to be built by removing restrictions on property owners, by getting out of the way on some of these elements, and this can be everything from having variances for every single thing that there is out there is one of the things that makes housing more slow to get built, more costly to build, and more if you look at the BZA process. So just as an example, there's a development that wants to basically add 3 stories onto an existing 3-story building in Central Square and convert the office space to housing and make like 29 small apartments, micro units, everything from 216 square feet up to about 500 square foot studios in this space in an existing building, no trees chopped down, no new permeable land taken over or anything else like that. And they can do this under the rules in a lot of ways. They're not exceeding any height limits. They're not exceeding any density limits. They're keeping it specifically under the 4.0 FAR cap, which is a technical term that doesn't matter, but they're basically, going to have this meet all of the criteria except for one, and that one is that you have to have 300 square feet of land for every home you create in Central Square. So if you're going to build a 6-story tall building, and you're going to fill the lot with it or whatever else you want to do, which you probably do because you're in a dense, square and everything else, you want to maximize the use of your land, you're limited to, in a 6-story building, have each of your homes have to be effectively 1,800 square feet in order to maximize that land. You cannot build more housing than that because of this 300 square foot limit times 6 stories. Each of your apartments would be 1,800 square feet to maximize that. Now, obviously, an 1,800 square foot apartment in Cambridge in Central Square is going to be ridiculously expensive, because by the time you're building that, the construction costs, everything else that goes into that, you're talking about building very expensive homes for a lot of people who don't need that much space. I'm living with a family of 4 in a 3-bedroom apartment that only has 1,200 square feet of space, and now that my older daughter has actually moved out of the home, I'm looking at this and being like, we kind of have too much floor space now. We have too much stuff. I've got to get rid of some stuff, and maybe downsize into a smaller place. It's only a 2-bedroom rather than 3-bedroom. And with 20,000 students in Cambridge who are living and sharing, 3-bedroom apartments with each other, or with, the roommates sleeping on the couch so they can afford things. Like, many of these people would love to live alone if you could give them an affordable way to do so, but there's not a lot of small apartments that can actually be built moderately affordably around for them to kind of, there aren't the options for small scale living if you don't need a lot of space. And if you open those up, you can actually have more of that available. But because of these rules about 300 square foot being, of ground area being required for every apartment, this apartment building that they're trying to build, so they'll have first floor retail and then 5 floors of apartments, can't be built because of that rule. So they have to go to the BZA, the Board of Zoning Appeal, and say, I would like a variance due to the conditions of this site. I believe that I should not have to follow this rule because it would present a hardship to me. But that process takes a long time. By the time that you have applied for something, made notice of the community meeting, put it in the newspaper twice, gotten it scheduled and put it on the calendar, the website for the BZA actually says that it will take 4 months to get a variance granted if you get it the first time, which you don't always. Sometimes you have to go back, you have to schedule another meeting, you have to get it continued, more people have a chance to speak and speak up. And during those 4 months, if you're a property developer looking to develop out a property and you've bought something and it's kind of sitting vacant or whatever else like that, and you don't know if you're going to get your approval, you're holding and paying costs on that. So if you look at, the cost that you have to pay every month in order to hold a building, you're paying a significant amount of cost for holding it for 4 months. After you get your zoning variance, you then have to go get building permits, which can take more time, in some cases months. You have to get all of these things through, so that by the time you actually started building anything, not only is it 6 months down the road, during which another 1,000 people have been priced out of Cambridge because there's no new housing being built, you're also in a position where you've been paying all those costs for months, and you're going to recoup those costs one way or another. If you're building rental properties, you'll put it into higher rents so that you can make your money back. If you're talking about, condos where you're selling them, like those condos are going to be higher priced because you've got to make your money back and satisfy your investors who are helping fund this project. All of these things just cause housing to be more expensive by having a longer delay and all this other stuff. If we had changed the rules in Cambridge, in Central Square, that said you don't need to have 300 square feet of Central Square property for every apartment, and it was only 150, this project wouldn't need to go before the BZA at all. They could have gone straight to the planning department, or not the planning department, the ISD, the inspection department, and said, please give me my building permit. Everything is as of right. Here we go. Let's go. And to have an additional 4 months of process or 6 months of process added onto this because you want to decide that 1,800 square feet is the correct number of square feet to have in a 6-story apartment building in Central Square, it's just silly. Just get that rule out of the way. Why do we even need to specify how big units should be on average? Let's just create more homes for people. Let's allow people to create whatever homes people want to buy, because there's a whole lot of different people in Cambridge at this point. There's 120,000 people who live here who are going to have different preferences, and we shouldn't try and get in the way of that. And if we got out of the way of that more, then we could see more housing developed, we could see more affordable options, we could see more inclusionary units. So this, for example, is looking at creating 4 or 5 inclusionary units. 20% of the floor space has to be dedicated to that. This would only be the 3rd or 4th inclusionary project since we upped the number to 20%, because it's really hard to build something under these restrictive rules that we've built, because they don't pencil out, they don't provide any margin for the developer to make any money. And if you aren't going to make any money on it, if you can't even pay your wages to your workers, then why would you build something? You can't do that. No one's going to just go broke providing free housing to people, unfortunately, unless you're a nonprofit who has that as your goal and you get grants or whatever. So we got to figure out how to get out of the way. We got to figure out how to allow more things. But we've also got to figure out how to make a more even trade between the haves and the have-nots, where we have people who've lived here for 30, 40 years and have these very low costs of living relative to more modern, recent incoming populations, in part because of the abnormally low property taxes in Cambridge compared to other jurisdictions, in part because of Cambridge's desirability, but in part because Cambridge has chosen not to build effectively for a long time, dating back through much of the last 100 years. As family sizes have shrunk, we have not provided enough homes to act as replacements for our people who live here, much less to match our job growth and need, and we really need to be doing that. So all of those things could help a lot. But a city manager who values those ideas of equity, who values the ideas of treating all people equally, not based on, incumbency, which is a really common filtering factor for a lot of people, is how long have you lived here and how much should you be rewarded on that? And to look at providing services that continue to have the city take on a role as providing public services to the people of Cambridge, whether it's municipal broadband, whether it's public parks, whether it's more options available, that maybe the city should be, instead of looking to private developers to do things even like fixing our sewer lines, that we should be investing in that and looking to reap the benefits of a great value generator that Cambridge is, to fix those things. We'll see how 2020 goes. Congrats to Sumbul Siddiqui and Ilana Malin on their new positions. Look forward